yeah, I'm focusing tonight on just insect pests that we are, facing. Get this guy out of the way. There we go. So one of our biggest problems that we see from year to year is bagworms. So bagworms are a little caterpillar that makes its home in this little bag that they develop on plant material. They're typically going to be found on things like junipers and spruces and things like that, firs, but they can be on a lot of different plant material, and their bag is going to look like that plant material. A lot of times when I get a call about it, at least when I first started, a lot of people just called them those Christmas ornaments, because that's kind of what they look like. It's Christmas ornaments hanging on the trees. We have had a bit of a break here from bagworms over the past few years. The extreme cold temperatures of 2021, when we got down to -29 for about, I think it was about 48 hours, we stayed below 0 degrees, or at least a full 24. And when that happens, that's going to kill off a lot of the bags. So when the research shows that if we get 24 hours of 0 degrees or below, that's going to kill about 75% of the bags, or the caterpillar eggs inside of those bags, because they overwinter as a little egg in those bags with the mom in there. And then they emerge in the spring and come out, and they feed on the leaves or needles of that plant that they're making their home on, and they'll cause browning and things like that to occur. So in heavy populations, like in this first picture here, they will really start to do some defoliation. And prior to 2021, they were getting to that point where they were killing trees. That doesn't happen all the time. And right now they're coming back. We're never going to fully get rid of bagworms. They are coming back, but they're not at that killing level. I think this year I've only had a couple calls on bagworms. And last year, I think I maybe had one. So they're not as high a population at this point, but they are going to come back, and it's something we need to keep an eye out for. I think in the Omaha area, they emerged right around Memorial Day, maybe a week or so, one way or the other from Memorial Day. And so that's going to differ, to your location and how warm it's been in your location, but most of them should be out at this point. So if you haven't noticed them, go take a real close look at your tree and see if those new ones are coming on. When they first start, they're very teeny tiny, like in these pictures here. There's even a fairly good size. They start out really very small. This is the adult male. So it's a moth here, a clearing moth that flies around with super cool antennae, as you can see, this cool like feathery antennae that they have. And then over here is your female, or one of your new ones coming out of the bag to get some food. The thing with bagworms is to make sure that you spray them when they're less than ½ inch in length. If they get much larger than that, your sprays are not going to be as effective, because then they're not feeding as much, and they've got that little bag that they've made that is like a little raincoat, and it repels a lot of the insecticide from getting to the actual caterpillars. You can spray them when they're larger than that, but you're not going to be as effective with your sprays. So that's why we say we want to spray them when they're less than ½ inch in length. Once they get to that, when we notice them, they're like 1.5 to 2 inches in length. And at that point, the best thing is to just hand pick them from the tree. Now, in some cases, that's a really big tree and a lot of bagworms. But just try to get as many off of them as you can. And so you do want to wait and spray until they've emerged from those bags. This was my experiment that I did one year. So you can take a handful of bags off the tree and kind of feel them, make sure that they actually they're not the empty ones from the year before. And if they feel like they got a little something in there, then toss those into I used one of those clear, like Ziploc brand, but you can use any brand of those clear containers that are plastic, hard plastic. And then I poked some holes in the top of it. And you want to leave it outside, and you want to put it on like the north or like the shadier area of the tree, because if you put it in the sun, this is going to warm up faster because it's a plastic container. Obviously, it's going to warm up. But so I did this one year and I placed it in the trees, and really it was pretty close. I think it was maybe about a week after they emerged in that box that they were actually emerging out in the real world. So it's kind of a good way to just know so that you don't have to look for it. And so all these little tiny black things in here, you see all these little guys? Those are the bagworms. Those are the caterpillars right after they emerge. So that's not just like frass or something. I mean, some of it is frass, but all these little blackish little squiggles are the caterpillars coming out. So that's how small they start out. And actually, when you first, if you are really looking, you can see at first they kind of like chew little edges out of the needles. So they're very small. So good insecticides to use for those. BT is really good. And that one's one that only kills caterpillars. So it's not going to affect a lot of other things in the environment. And so it's a little bit more environmentally friendly. But that doesn't work if they're getting too big. It's more of like right away. Otherwise, you can use like Tempo, you can use 7. There's a lot of different insecticides you can use for them. I do see there's a little bit of chats here. Let me see. Okay, I was just making sure it wasn't a question there. So yeah, so they're pretty easy to take care of. The problem with bagworms for using an insecticide on them is that it's usually a really big tree. You know, it's like a full windbreak oftentimes, and you have to get all the way to the top and you have to get it so it's like drenching the tree. So that's where we have a lot of times a pest control company will do that for you. So we've got a lot of good pest control operators that have taken a lot of training, and they'll do a good job with that. So if it's small enough, you can spray them yourself though. When they're on like a deciduous tree or something like that, I wouldn't be terribly worried about them. That's usually not going to be a high population. Their higher population is going to be on either like your juniper shrubs or the evergreen type of trees. So that is bagworms. Yep. Okay. Any questions on the bagworms yet? I'll just keep on moving through. Okay. So the next one here is the Japanese beetle. And this has really been a problem in my area the past few years. So Japanese beetles are an invasive insect. They come to us from Japan, of course. As an adult, they're a voracious feeder. They feed on over 300 different species of plants. I've also seen where they feed on over 500 species of plants. So pretty much if you're a plant, you probably could be eaten by a Japanese beetle. Then the immature form is a white grub, and they're just like the other white grubs that get in our turf and feed on our turf. So most insects are going to be a problem as a caterpillar or as an adult, or as an immature or as an adult. In this case, they're a problem in both situations. So the white grub here, just like your C-shaped white grub, they'll feed on your turf roots and cause brown spots to occur. And they would be, the adult here is just now starting to fly in my area. It might be a little, I think it was in Omaha, maybe a week or so ago I saw. But the Japanese beetle is green with these lovely copper colored elytra or wing coverings. And then they have 5 little tufts of white hair along each side of the body and these 2 on the end. If they don't have those tufts of hair along the side of the body, it's not a Japanese beetle. There are a couple of lookalikes, and this one's often confused with that really big green June beetle that buzzes very loudly through your vegetable garden. But this one is a little bit smaller than that, and you're going to have those tufts of hair on it. And so when they feed as an adult, they're going to, as I said, the larvae feed on the roots of your turf. And you can actually pull that turf up if it's brown and look if there's no roots still attached, then it's probably grubs. If you can pull it up like a piece of carpet, then it's really grubs. And then the adults chew on things like the buds, the leaves, the corn silks, flowers themselves, and cause a lot of problems. And then they skeletonize our leaves. So they're going to do things like this throughout our landscape. And one of their biggest trees that they like is the linden tree, and I have 2 in my front yard, so that's fun. And notice this picture here is skeletonizing buckeye on a buckeye in August. This is not fall color. It's brown because of the damage that happens. And so this is just an up close of what that damage looks like. And so the problem with them is how to control them, because so when they come into a new area for the first like 5 to 7 years, they're really high in population. After that, they're not as bad. They're still there, but they're to a more manageable level. And so in my area right now, it's really hitting like the Beatrice, Wilbur areas, Crete areas, those kinds of places, Cortland, where it's already gone through their big wave in Fairbury. They had that a few years back when I first started, actually. It was pretty bad there. And I know Omaha had it quite a few years ago, and it's I think Scott said it's getting to a more manageable level at this point. So you can manage the grubs in your turf. Now, managing the white grub is not going to fully eliminate Japanese beetles from your landscape, because the adults can still fly in from neighbors and things like that. So, but it can help. It can reduce the population. So some of the good products would be like your imidacloprid or your merit, or the chlorantraniliprole, which is your acelepryn. Those are probably your most commonly found ones. And right now is a great time to be applying that. So if you've got white grubs, you've had white grubs, you're finding new white grubs, go ahead and get that treated. You can do some curative methods later in the year, but really most of the time, by the time that we're noticing it later in the year, it's about the time that they're going to stop feeding and go deeper into the soil profile. So at that point, usually if it's like August, September, I say, don't really worry about it, and just treat next year. Most of their damage is going to be done at that point. But there are some biological control options. I'm not sure of the efficacy on all of these. I think the BT can work pretty well. I think this milky spore bacteria, I don't think that the research, I don't think it's a solid, yes, this works research. But it's best to use those preventative measures and apply it when those eggs are being laid, so that it's right there in the soil profile as they emerge from that egg, and eat it right away. And then it's easier to kill them when they're small. For adults, really that hand removal is going to be a really good way to do that. Now in my giant linden trees out front, probably not the best idea. But on, like roses or things like that, because roses is another one of their favorite species or favorite foods. So going out there in the evening around that 6 to 7, I think they say 6:30 is the time to treat for, or to go out and hand pick Japanese beetles. Because what they do at about that time is it's like they're having a party, and a whole bunch of them just kind of ball up. And so you can go up to a rose plant with a bucket, or in this case, he's just got a little cup of soapy water, and you hang that below the branch they're on and tap on the branch, and that whole ball of those Japanese beetles will fly in there, or will fall in there, and it will kill them. That soapy water will kill them. So it's a pretty good way to manage them. Just be careful when using insecticides around blooming plants, because we don't want to harm our pollinators. So there are some products that we can use. I'd say 7, which is they changed it. It used to be Carbaryl. Now it's Zeta cypermethrin, I think. And so that one is really, 7 is a really good way to manage the adult Japanese beetles. It's a pretty good, effective method. Just being careful with pollinators and things like that. If you can cut the blooms off first, try not to hit the blooms, those kinds of things. You can use some systemic insecticides. I would apply them before now. You want to apply those like in the spring sometime, like your imidacloprid as a soil drench. But systemic insecticides cannot be used on linden trees. And that is because linden trees are a highly pollinated plant. So a lot of pollinators come to it. And if you're using a systemic insecticide, it will get into those flowers, and it can kill a lot of good pollinator insects. So one of them that we see on lindens is the soldier beetle. The little yellow one kind of looks like a yellow lightning bug. with 2 little brown spots on the back. And that one, you know, among others, I was out here around my lindens about 2 weeks ago or so. They were blooming heavy, and I could just hear the bees buzzing in that tree, which was really cool. And I looked up and there was butterflies flying everywhere. It was really cool. I mean, I know I'm an entomologist, so, but most people find that pretty cool. But there are some other less risk options you can use for Japanese beetles. So like the piola or your neem oil, they're not going to last as long, and they're lower risk. Okay, so they're not safe completely, right? So the safest, if you want no risk at all, it would be hand removal into those bucket of soapy water. And avoid Japanese beetle traps. I know they look like they work great. They're sold like they work great, but they work too good. So they're bringing in way more Japanese beetles into your landscape than what was there originally. I will say, if the bag to catch them has to be this big, it works too well, okay? Or if you need a trash can on it, right? A big old trash can, it works too well, right? So that's bringing in far too many Japanese beetles. And as a person who used to trap Japanese beetles, when I was in college, I worked for the USDA. I can tell you, you don't want to draw the short straw and have to open up the lid of that trash can, because Japanese beetles are a very smelly insect. So yeah, they look like they work great, but they're pulling in way more than what would be in your landscape originally. So you're going to have more damage to your plants if you're using those traps than if you don't. Okay, so save your money. So another problem we've been seeing, especially in the Lancaster area, I know Sarah's been dealing with this a lot up in Lancaster County, is the magnolia scale. I don't see a ton of this, but I don't think in the Gage County area we have a ton of magnolias. But this is a soft scale, and these little bubble looking things, those are actually insects. They're kind of a cool insect because they're like a suction cup to the tree, and they don't move. Once they suction cup to the tree, that's where they're going to be. And you know, in heavy populations, they'll kind of just hang over each other. As long as they can get their mouth parts to the tree, they're okay with that. But they have a piercing, sucking mouth part, and so they're going to suck all the juices out of the tree. And when they do that, they can cause a lot of damage to the tree. And as they build up, they're easily building up, and they're much more difficult to manage the more that you get in that population. So they will, they cause branch stunting and branch dieback. You'll get yellow leaves, and eventually, in some cases, it causes tree death. The other thing with these, among other different insects, would be the development of honeydew, and that promotes the growth of that sooty mold. It also leads to honeydew dripping from the tree to items below, and that's probably when I get the call the most. We'll talk about lace bugs and aphids here in a little bit, but when they're doing sucking the juices out, it's literally an excrement that comes from the insect, and it drops from the tree to items down below. And I get the call that I'm parked my truck underneath this tree, and now it's all sticky. So with that is one of the problems that people will see from magnolia scale as well. And then because of that honeydew, you'll get more ant and wasp activity. So this one is one that you really need to treat with 2 or more active ingredients for 2 or more years to really start getting a handle on it. So you can spray pesticides when the crawlers emerge. So that would be more of a contact type of insecticide when those crawlers are emerging. And that can be, you know, your 7, the cyfluthrin products, insecticidal soaps, or horticultural oils. But you have to catch it when the crawlers are emerging. Once they're into their little suction cup stage, you're not going to be effective with a lot of your chemicals. So then you can go with the systemic insecticides in May as a soil drench, and then you're taking the thought process out of it. I guess it's easier because you just apply it once, it's going to go throughout the whole tree, and it'll kill them as they feed on it. There are some insect growth regulators that you can use, but those are only available to licensed applicators. So you'd have to hire someone to do that for you. But it's safer because it only affects insects, because it affects how they develop and doesn't allow them to develop properly, and then they die. So that is another option. But you can find out when these are in the crawler stage by a couple of different methods. If you think they're in the crawler stage, you can take a piece of paper and hang it underneath a branch and tap on that branch. If you see little pepper flakes moving around on that paper, then they're in the crawler stage. The other thing you can do is take a piece of like masking tape and wrap it sticky side out around some branches, and you'll see them when they start moving across the tape. I like to go with masking tape because if you forget to go take it off, it'll break. If it's duct tape, it won't break, and then you can girdle the tree. So just a couple of tricks there. Okay, ash sawfly was a problem early this year. It's not really problematic, but we had a lot of them this year. They were like falling from the tree. And so I just kind of wanted to discuss it a little bit more. There's a brown-headed one and a black-headed one. As you can see, this little guy has a black head. This little guy has a brown head. That's the difference. Entomologists just call them as they see them. But they were feeding on the ash trees. They were causing some damage to the leaves, but more what we were noticing was all the little caterpillars at the base of the tree, or maybe the high number of birds feeding on them. It is a good food for the birds. This is actually the immature of a sawfly, which is a tiny non-stinging wasp. So it's not it's not a caterpillar. It's not a true caterpillar. And these are a short-term problem. They were gone 2 weeks after they were a problem, but we had tons of calls in those 2 weeks when they were a problem. And now the ash trees are perfectly fine. But it was a problem this spring, and it's just some years we're going to have bigger population of things like this. Weather kind of tells you what's going to be the best year, or best, different weather conditions will lead to a higher population. Sorry, I was trying to get that out. So this year was just the year for them. But in most cases, you don't really need to use any insecticides. So, don't worry about it too much. But there are some things you can use if it gets bad enough. But really, I had one lady call and she said she was just kind of hosing her tree down with soapy water, and that'll take care of it for you. So there's another sawfly that we have problems with, and this is the rose slug. It's actually a sawfly as well. So it's hard to see on my pictures, but right here is the little fella, or right here. I think they're kind of cute, personally, but they're this translucent green. It always kind of reminds me of the Slimer from Ghostbusters in their color, and they have that brown head, and they're on the underside of the leaves on your rose leaves. And at first they're just going to they don't even make a hole. They just kind of leave this, they take all the green away, and then you get these brown spots in the leaves, and then holes will develop from that. And so really the problem is mostly aesthetic. I get them in my roses all the time, and my roses are perfectly fine. They grow out of it. Yeah, there might be a few holes at the base of the plant, but once it grows out of it, it's perfectly fine. These are more of a problem in that mid-May to mid-June timeframe. So in this case, obviously this was a bad infestation here in this picture. Most of the time they're not that bad. But at this point, I would say that most of them are done doing their damage, and they're now turning into this guy right here, this adult sawfly. And so, I don't really worry about it. You can hand remove them if you want. If it's excessive, you can use things like insecticidal soaps, permethrin, your 7, bifenthrin, cyfluthrin products, things like that. So just make sure that you are looking on the underside of the leaves to see that you actually have a good population of the rose slugs before you treat, because like I said, at this point, you wouldn't need to treat. The damage is done. Aphids are one, I know that Scott said that they were blowing up in Omaha this year. It's a really bad aphid year. And so aphids they're a fun insect as well. Aphids are pretty easy to identify. They're a little teeny tiny insect. They can vary in color, but they have these, it's hard to see in this picture. You see these little pokey things coming out of their rear end, like these two right here. So those are called cornicles, but we like to call them tailpipes because that's kind of what they look like on an aphid, is that they have tailpipes. Aphids always have those tailpipes. If it doesn't have the tailpipes, it's not an aphid. This was one I took on my honeyvine milkweed, it was growing as a weed in my garden, but I thought, well, look at those aphids. Aren't they pretty? And so there's a lot of different species of aphids, but they're pretty well host specific. So that's why there's so many different species, because most plants have an aphid that will feed on them. And so the damage, so you can see on like this picture here, where you just see all the little critters on the underside. You'll see the aphids themselves. You'll see the exoskeletons from what they've emerged from, and then you'll see the frass as well. But they're one of our piercing sucking insects. So they suck all the juices out of your plants. This was a cool one I got in. These were actually the woolly aphid. Just starting to develop. It's hard to see, but this one right here looks kind of like a cotton ball or a feathery thing, and that's an aphid as well. So that was a pretty fun aphid. But they suck on those juices and they'll cause your leaves to curl downward, like towards the ground versus upward for other things, right? And so they're going to cause that discoloration because of the yellowing that happens when they suck the good chlorophyll out, and then that cupping. Most of the time, it's just a little bit of aesthetic damage. It's not too terrible. And really, in most cases, if you leave them alone, predators will come in after about a week or so, and they'll take care of them. In some cases, if you spray for aphids, you could actually cause a resurgence of them. And so because the aphids will come back quicker than the predators do. And so you cause more aphids the second time around. So sometimes if you just leave them alone, then the predators will take care of them. And they can be controlled also with a strong spray of water. Just hit the underside of the leaves, it'll knock them off and kill them. Cleaning up the weeds can help reduce with that, but there are some pesticides you can use if you want to try it, if it's a high enough population. We have aphids in our vegetable gardens, as well as in like trees and shrubs and perennials as well. So none of your plants really are very safe from aphid damage. So it's something to keep an eye out for. I had, it was probably in mid-May, a gentleman called me. He had black spots on the underside of his peppers leaves. And so once I saw the picture, they were aphids. So yeah, they can be real problematic, but it's usually a short-term situation. Another one of our favorite piercing, sucking mouthpart insects would be the lace bug. And I'll take a quote from my friend Scott here, Scott Evans. He told me, or he said one time, that they look like salt and pepper flakes, like with shoulder pads, and they really kind of do. It's the funniest thing. And so these are also on the underside of your leaves. You'll notice the actual lace bugs themselves. You'll notice the frass, sometimes the eggs, sometimes the spent exoskeletons from when they grow bigger, but they cause maybe a little more yellowing than they do the cupping. But again, if you just flip over that leaf, look at the underside, you will see these little guys wandering around on there. And again, there's a lot of different hosts for lace bugs. So there's going to be a lot of damage, or they can be on a lot of different trees, but mostly on trees that I see these on, but they can be on other things too. And then another one of those that sucks all those plant juices out and causes that yellowish coloration to your leaves would be spider mites. The two-spotted spider mite is right down here, and they are more of a problem in the summer heat. And then this one over here is your spruce spider mite, and they're a problem more in like your spring and fall. They like cooler weather. But if you notice a real fine webbing on your plant material, that's a pretty good indication that you've got spider mites. So sometimes people will bring me like a spruce or a fir, and the needles are brown and kind of look like they're falling off, but they're kind of held to the plant as well. And those are usually from spider mite damage. A lot of times when people bring them to me, I look at them under my microscope, and maybe most of them are already dead because they have, been attacked by predators and things like that. So a strong spray of water will take care of these guys for the most part. And when I say a strong spray of water, turn your hose and sprayer to the jet and do it a few times, every other day or a couple times a week for a couple weeks. And then you really should take care of them pretty well. It just knocks them off and kills them, but new ones can come in. So I would do it for a while. But yeah, they cause this stippling effect on the leaves. And then the phlox plant bug, sorry. These are on all phlox, but primarily the tall and creeping phlox. So again, you're going to have that stippling effect on the leaves. And there's a couple of them sitting on the plants that Jody Green, I think she said, so she's the urban entomologist in Douglas Sarpy counties, and she had some tall phlox and has now had to cut it back because of the phlox bug infestation. So they do have two generations per year, one in the spring and one in the summer. And so, you might think you got rid of them and then they're going to come back for another round. But they're going to feed on the leaves, the buds, the flowers, things like that, and hiding on the underside of the leaves. So they're harder to find. But you can clean up in the fall and early spring and use insecticidal soaps, horticultural oils, pyrethrins. Permethrin is your 8 product that you can purchase in the stores. Excuse me. And just make sure that you get good full coverage on both the upper and lower sides of the leaves. Tent caterpillar is another one that we've seen this year. It's a problem in May and June. And this one is the one colorful yellow and black caterpillar. And they are going to develop in their webbing. And the webbing for tent caterpillar is going to be in the branch crotches. So where the branch comes out from the main trunk, versus your fall webworm that's going to be out on the end of the branch. So these are mostly cherry, apple, crabapple, choke cherry, plum type of infestations, but they can be on some other plants as well. And most of your damage from these are going to be aesthetic as well. And your trees should survive, but sometimes they can be a little higher population and do a little more damage. If you really want to go organic, take an old broom and just gather up this webbing with the caterpillars in it and just either throw the whole webbing in the broom end and all of that, like into a bucket of soapy water or something like that, or some other method to kill them, basically, once you pulled that webbing out. It is sometimes difficult to, or a lot of times it's difficult to get them with an insecticide spray because they're in that webbing. It's kind of like with your bagworm. Once they're bigger and in that webbing, you're not going to be able to get your sprays to penetrate the webbing to get to where the caterpillars are. But once they, have developed through all their larval stages, they'll drop to the ground, pupate, and become an adult. I think they're a moth. Don't quote me on that. And then another one here, we've got the geranium budworm, also known as a tobacco budworm. And these will feed on a lot of different plants. I think I've seen them most in like petunias and roses. And they chew through the bud as it's developing, your flower bud. So you get these holes in the flower bud. It may not open. And if it does open, it's a little deformed because something chewed right through it. It's kind of like the very hungry caterpillar chews right through the buds. And so it can really destroy your blooming. And if it's on a petunia, I mean, the whole point of you planting a petunia is for the blooms, right? Because they're an annual and you just want that pop of color. And if something's coming in and chewing right through that, that's ruining your petunias and ruining your plan for your garden. The problem is these are harder to control with an insecticide as well, because, it's the same concept here. They're chewing into that bud and then they're going to sit in there for a little bit and you can't spray them very well. There are 2 generations per year, in the late spring and then again in the late summer. So if you had them the first round, you may want to watch for them in the second round. So our insecticides aren't always very effective for them. but permethrin, cyfluthrin, and bifenthrin are going to be your best option. But BT, even though these are caterpillars, is not effective against the budworm. So the other thing to remember is to use new clean soil every year for those potted plants, which is just a good practice for plant growth anyway, because it, you know, then it gets new nutrients there for your plants in the potted plants, but these will overwinter in the soil of those around those plants. So if you don't get new soil, then you'll have budworms again the next year. The blister beetle is a really fun one as well. This one, I think I've mostly had problems with this one in a vegetable garden setting, but this year I recently had someone call me and say they had this gray one, was just covering some type of either perennial or a shrub. So they can be problematic in other things. For the most part, they're not usually a real problem, but in some years their population gets so high that they do a lot of damage in our vegetable gardens. And there's a lot of different species of blister beetles that have different colorations. This is the powdery gray one. There's also the black one that I've seen. And I know in the western areas, this striped one is problematic. Now, the bigger things you need to worry about with blister beetles is, one, if you're handling them, they have a saliva that can be toxic to some people and cause blisters, hence the name blister beetle. But the other thing is they can also be in hay for horses and things like that. And it can, I can't remember if my uncle said it can kill the horses, because he's had some troubles with blister beetles and he has horses. I think it can kill them in some cases, or at least do a lot of damage to how they develop and makes them sick. That's what I was trying to say. So that's the other thing you've got to worry about is, are these getting in plant material that would be hay or would become food for any type of livestock, but especially horses. So just be careful with these. You know, if you find them in your garden, yeah, you can hand pick them and throw them into a bucket of soapy water. You may want to wear your gardening gloves when you do that, just to prevent any damage there. Otherwise, you can spray them. Most of your general insecticides like 7 or 8 or bifenthrin will work for these. So if they become a high enough population, but like I said, most of the time it's not that bad. And then my arch nemesis here, this is the squash bug. I say it's my arch nemesis because I battle it about every year, as do most people. Pretty much once a squash bug finds your garden, it will always come back. So you look for these little rusty colored football shaped things on the underside of the leaves. And these can be in any of your cucurbits, zucchini, squash, melons, pumpkins, cucumbers, all of those. And so they lay their eggs on the underside of the leaves, and then they emerge to this, and you don't probably notice them too much when they're at this stage because of that green abdomen. But then they turn into these little gray things with the black legs. And typically they're in very large population when they're at this stage. And then some of them start to develop to the full adult stage. So you get like this mix of this life stage, and this life stage, all just kind of living together, doing damage on your plants. If it's just a small population, they'll just feed a little bit on the leaves and suck those juices out and cause a little bit of stippling. But if left alone, that population can really build up and get very high. And then they're going to do a lot more damage, and they can start doing damage to the fruits that are developing even, and things like that. So this is one, they should be out now. I haven't seen these yet in my garden, but they should be anytime now if they're not. And then the other one that we have problems with in the vegetable garden is the squash vine borer. And so this is the one, the female is a clearwing moth that lays her eggs at the base of this plant. And then as the larvae emerge from the eggs, they chew their way into the stem of your plant. And then they're just kind of sitting there, like right in that middle, right where water and nutrients flow, and they're stopping all of that movement. So you get very quickly, they will wilt and die. And so there's other things that can cause that dieback as well. But what you're looking for is that frass at the base of the stem. And I always think it kind of looks like something chewed on it first and then like spit some of it back out. And that's just where how they get in there and then develop. And if you see that at the base of the plant, you know that it was the squash vine borer. Because we can get cucumber wilt virus from the cucumber beetles, and it will wilt very quickly from that too. But if you have this, then you know that it was the vine borer. They don't usually live long enough to do much for fruit development. Typically, once it starts getting in there, it dies pretty quickly. If you catch it when the caterpillar first got in there, you can do some surgery on the plant, kind of slit it open and pull that larvae out, and it can recover from it. But I just kind of, most of the time, by the time I notice it, it's pretty well gone. So if you're already seeing a lot of this wilting and heat stress from it, it's probably not going to make it from that. So for those insects in the garden, and really this is a lot of these chemicals and things are going to work just as well anywhere. But inspecting and removing leaves with eggs on them for squash bugs, smashing those eggs as you see them, mechanical removal of the nymphs and adults. Now, I understand if any of you has anything else to do in the world, because you cannot keep up with squash bugs in the garden. And so, it would be a full-time job to mechanically remove all of those once they get going. But otherwise, you can use those general insecticides like your 7, 8, or bifenthrin. Make sure that it's labeled for use in the garden, whatever product you're using, even if it's the same active ingredient, you want to make sure it's the one labeled for the garden. And you also want to make sure that you're following all the label recommendations on how often you can reapply. You can't just reapply the next day. You got to give it, I think 7 would be, I think it's 7 to 10 days, maybe. 8 might be more like 14 days. And I'm not sure on the bifenthrin, but you want to make sure you're waiting that long to reapply. Do keep reapplying if you're struggling with squash bugs and squash vine borer, but make sure you're following that label instructions. And then the other thing with them is following the PHI. So there's going to be in the label, it's going to say, you sprayed it on your green beans. It'll say PHI for green beans is 3 days. I don't know. I'm just, for example. And so if it says that, then you have to wait 3 days from the day you apply to the day you can harvest. So if you spray on a Monday, you need to wait till Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So you need to wait till Thursday to safely, for food safety guidelines for when you're harvesting and consuming that product. It's not, that you can go and spray and then harvest and then wait 3 days to eat it. It's that many days till you can harvest. And then the other thing is squash vine borers can be pretty well controlled if you wrap a little aluminum foil at the base of the plant around the stem. Basically, you want to go from where it comes out of the ground to pretty much where the first leaves start. That should be a pretty good range, and that's where that vine borer adult is going to be laying her eggs. And I will tell you that they are out. I was out watering actually my neighbor's garden, and I saw one flying around over there. So I know they're out. So just keep your eyes out for that. And if you're wanting to spray for them, you can spray for them. Diatomaceous earth is a good option for squash vine borer. Just sprinkle a little bit of that around the base of the plant. And that's an organic option for you if you're looking for that. But otherwise, just cleaning up the garden at the end of the season. If you've got any kind of plant material like a perennial or an annual or anything in the garden that has a lot of insect issues, if you clean that up at the end of the season, that will help. The other thing is if you till the garden in the fall, what that can do is pulls any of those insect eggs that are in the soil. It'll pull them up to the soil surface, and then they'll freeze over the winter, and it'll kill some of those back. I'll tell you for squash bugs, one of the things that I like to do is once I'm tired of zucchini, I allow them to just be on the zucchini, and I'm either treating or watching my cucumbers, because at that point I still want the cucumbers. They like the zucchinis over the cucumbers, so I leave my zucchinis there as a trap crop for them. So that can work as well. So